I have said before that you can't have a civilization that doesn't have art. When we think about the great civilizations historically, all of them had a great production of culture and art because society has built to observe itself, and the sophistication of the great civilizations were their ability to look at themselves. And what allows a society to do that are the producers of art and culture with a mirror back to the core of the society exactly. What is being produced at that moment? How people are thinking of themselves and how individuals are relating to the social structure at that time. Art is the vehicle through which we understand that. Were you to take away art, what would be that mirror? How would we see what we were about? How would we understand what was going on in Paris at the time of the Impressionists, when people were learning to see in a completely different way? Pre-cinematography, Pierre, all of these things are just emerging, and here are people looking at the world in a very different way, which was considered so radical at that time.
In 2010, scientists involved in the Large Hadron Collider (LHC) project said they may have approached the Higgs boson. The Higgs boson, also known as the God particle, is said to play an important role in shaping the universe after the Big Bang. April 5, 2015. After a shutdown and maintenance of about 2 years, the European Large Hadron Collider was restarted and the second phase of its operation was officially launched with the hope of exploring the discovery of the existence of supersymmetric particles of the Higgs-coupled particles. Physicists at CERN in Geneva have achieved the first 7 tera-electron-volt proton-proton collisions at the Large Hadron Collider. The LHC consists of a 27-kilometer ring of superconducting magnets with a number of accelerating structures to boost the energy of the particles along the way. The electromagnets are built from coils of special electric cable that operates in a superconducting state, efficiently conducting electricity without resistance or loss of energy. Here requires chilling the magnets to -271.3 degrees Celsius, a temperature colder than outer space. The collider has 4 crossing points, around which are 7 sensors, each designed for certain kinds of research. The LHC collides proton beams, but it can also use beams of heavy ions.
And I want to say that Wilson, who died over 30 years ago, began his career before modemlet was taught and analyzed in the universities, as he said at one time, and I think a piece about Christian Golf's Gauss is I called him Gauss as my father in his generation at Princeton a year or 2 after Wilson called him. When Wilson was studying the latest daring writers to get into the curriculum were wits of the 90s, and maybe Goss had his reputation as a bohemian romantic because he had known Oscar in Paris, but there was no modemlet. Wilson came then from a different world, and he became the focal point of a broad mainstream American culture that thought that modern literature and wanted modem literature to be able to be read and appreciated by ordinary people. They were not modernists in an abstract sense, and certainly some of them like T.S. Eliot and Faulkner were too difficult for some of their writings to be read by ordinary people. But this was a world before the division between the brows or between a lead or whatever had established itself as part of our consciousness.
There's sugar in a lot of foods where you don't expect it. Of course, there's lots of sugar in donuts of ice cream, or pastries, or other things that are sweet, candy of course, but there are other places where you see it and you don't necessarily expect it. So as an example, peanut butter. Here's a list of ingredients from Skippy peanut butter and you see that sugar is the second most common ingredient. So that you may know from the reading food labels that these ingredients and any food labels that are listed in order of how much there is in the food itself. So sugar comes right after peanuts. Here's another example, beef stew. You wouldn't necessarily expected to find sugar in beef stew, but it's there. Now it's down the list of ingredients, it's actually toward the end, but if you look at the marketing of this and food at the can, it says, there are fresh potatoes and carrots, but actually there's more sugar in this than there are carrots. And, So you wouldn't eat something like beef stew and expect to find this to be the case.
So what do we mean by well-being? Health, happiness, a sense of achievement and contentment, a state of mind and body where people can thrive. Well-being is not something that is purely limited to people who are facing extraordinary challenges in their lifestyle, health, or personal circumstances. Everybody here has a level of well-being. Music so often forms an intuitive part of our well-being management, music to pick us up, music to calm us down, and music to heal our sorrows. Our aim through research is to move from this level of intuitive application of music through to informed use in our communities to take the next step in the understanding of the power of music in human life. Music already works for us on so many levels, whether it's soothing and teaching our infants, bringing people and communities together, adding spirit to our work and personal endeavors, but there is no reason to stop here. Now the economists calculated, it's a back-of-the-envelope calculation, that removing all immigration controls would double the size of the world economy, and even a small relaxation of immigration controls would lead to disproportionately big gains. Now from an ethical point of view, it's hard to argue against a policy that will do so much to help people that are much poorer than us. The famous RAND study reckons that a typical immigrant who arrives in the U.S. ends up with $20,000 a year. That's rough. It's not just the migrants themselves who gain, it's the countries they come from. Already, the migrants from poor countries working in rich countries send home around $200 billion a year, through formal channels, and about twice as that through informal channels. And that compares to the neat $100 million that Western governments give in aid. These remittances are not wasted on weapons or siphoned off into Swiss bank accounts, they go straight into the pockets of local people. They pay for food, clean water, and medicines, they help kids in school, they help start up a new business. I'm just going to take on the stuff we're left off. The whole I want to now talk about it's called melatonin. And the synthesis is in the pineal gland, which is very small. It is the size of a pea in your brain. The corpus is the site of the soul, and it is where melatonin is made. And it has a rhythm as well. And in this sense, it is the opposite of the callosum. It peaks at night. We call it as the darkness hormone. In every species that we studied, melatonin occurs at night. And it's a hormone that prepares you for the things that your species does at night. So, of course, in humans, we sleep, but animals, like rodents, they are awake. It's a hormone that is related to darkness behavior. So, let me about the polar regions, just to clarify exactly what we mean. And we have first of all the Arctic at the top of the Earth and the Antarctic at the bottom, and so the Arctic was named after the Greek word for bear. Now surprisingly it's not after the polar bears that live in the Antarctic or live in the Arctic, and based on it's after the Little and Great Bear constellations that can be seen in the sky. Now the Greeks also hypothesized that there would be the Anti-Arctic, which is how we get the name Antarctica, and of course it wasn't discovered until much later on. Now these regions are opposite in many ways other than just their names and their location on the globe, and so if we look at the Arctic first of all, and the Arctic is actually an ocean surrounded by land, and so you can see here this is the UK down here and this kind of Russia and then American Canada around here, and so there is a bit of land cover in our ice on the top in the Arctic, which is Greenland here and Marcy all this area here. Surprisingly a lot of people don't realize that this isn't actually land. The North Pole isn't on land. It's just one big ocean,